Rise of the Exile, Book 1 of the Shadow of the Tyrant King series, by J.D. Matter. Chapter 26, The Night Ghoul. They dragged Lucas through the streets. He was a hideous sight. When pedestrians saw him, they winced and looked away. The soldiers were smiling and laughing. That was most difficult for Lucas to comprehend. What horrific thing existed in a man that made him take pleasure in the suffering of others? Lucas did not know. He did understand, only too late, what true pain felt like. His body crumpled, screamed silently at him. No matter how he tensed or tucked, there was no relief for him. They pulled Lucas along, leaving a bloody trail, to an old municipal building the Black Eagle had converted into a jailhouse, as there was no need for such a place before the Black Eagle came. They dragged his body over sharp bumps, which Lucas correctly assumed were stairs. There was darkness and foul odor, like many people who had not bathed. Lucas coughed and was surprised to make a gurgling noise. An awful metallic taste filled his mouth. He spit. It was blood. At first he was scared that they would beat him again for spitting, but the floor was covered with old blood stains. His blood was merely an addition to the morbid collage decor. They yanked open a cell door, threw Lucas inside, and slammed the door shut with an echoing clang. His face rested upon a cold metal drain in the middle of a rough concrete floor. He felt the presence of people in the cell with him. Many people. Someone slipped a bundle of clothes under his head as a makeshift pillow. Someone else began prodding him and examining his wounds. They were like him, whoever they were. They understood pain. At last, while in compassionate hands, Lucas lost consciousness. He had an odd dream in which a classroom full of students were screaming at him. They were all very blurry, like he saw them through thick, smoky glass, but he could tell that they looked very frightened of him. A warm shaft of light through the cell window awoke him as it beamed onto his closed eyes. At first, he did not know where he was, and his gut reaction was to get up. His body, however, did not work properly. What little he did move caused excruciating pain, and he moaned. "Shh, they don't like noise," someone whispered into Lucas's ear. Lucas slowly opened his eyes as far as the swelling would allow and was astonished to see that such a quiet room was actually filled with people, more people than he thought could fit in that cell. They were dirty, bruised, and downtrodden. An old man approached Lucas. "My goodness, son, you're so young. What's your name?" "Lucas Archer." "Ah, that explains it. You must be related to the great mage, Archer." "Yeah, he was my father." "That's why you're here." "No, I got into a fight at school." "Ah, they wouldn't throw you in this cell for that. They only throw people of influence into this cell." Lucas suddenly felt like a fool. It was his fault he was there. Yesterday, he bragged to Zeke Whitmark about who he was and that his father came from Atrium City. Zeke had obviously told the Black Eagle soldiers. Lucas wished he had not punched that strange brat. He wished he had not bragged. It was so unlike him, but attempting to emulate Zeke backfired spectacularly. "We have to find a way out of here." Lucas's sudden new reality panicked him. He tried to sit up, the way he had sat up thousands of times before, but this time, pain shot him back down. He yelped. "Quiet!" someone whispered. "We can't just rot in here," yelled Lucas. "Hey!" they heard a guard yell from down the hall. "Who's making all that racket?" The guard's thudding steps echoed and his keys rattled ominously. The burly guard glowered down upon them. "Hey, new kid, you making all that noise?" "No, it was me," said the old man. "Yeah, sure it was, Grandpa. Looks like you got another beating coming, kid, and another, till you learn how to keep your mouth shut." The guard rattled his key in the lock until the heavy metal door clanged open. He thudded toward Lucas. "I said it was me, you daft fool!" The old man knew that would divert the guard. The guard grabbed the old man by his collar and dragged him out of the cell. "He's lying! It was me!" yelled Lucas. "Leave him alone! You'll kill him!" The guard pummeled the old man until he was motionless on the floor. Then the guard turned his attention toward Lucas. "So it was you, huh?" The guard dragged Lucas, which in and of itself was excruciating. When the heavy blows came, the pain caused Lucas to lose consciousness again. Another blurry vision plagued him. This time, he dreamt he was in the streets of Devonstone. There were many Black Eagle soldiers around him. Some tried to attack him, but soon after they did, they fell to the ground, choking and dying. Arrows and swords had no effect on him. Lucas felt like he could do anything, go anywhere, and stop anyone in his path. He could. He did. Why, though, was he burdened with such blurry sight? He worried that maybe he was losing his vision, along with his mind. Lucas was jostled awake. Someone was shaking him, mindful to be gentle, but it still hurt. "Quiet! You've been mumbling in your sleep." He awoke in the crowded cell. He was dreaming. Normally, that dream would have been disturbing, but now he would have rather remained lost in a dream than stuck in his new reality. The walls were peeling with paint and rust. There was an open window with bars high on the wall near the ceiling. Lucas's many cellmates were huddled and dirty. Their clothes were tattered. All the men had beards, and the women's hair was matted. They were expressionless, like corpses that have not yet died. The old man who helped Lucas was curled up in a corner, bloodied and sleeping, or unconscious. Lucas could not tell which. Someone pushed a crumpled piece of soggy bread toward Lucas. He gagged. Putting that lumpy mush of dough in his mouth was nearly inconceivable. His cellmates, however, had sunken cheeks. They were gaunt and frail, starving. To them, it was probably a prized morsel. He did not want to seem ungrateful. Lucas grimaced and quickly shoved it in his mouth. It squished like a wet sponge, and Lucas swallowed a hard, painful swallow, hardly chewing at all. He felt for collovium. It was still intact. If he had some paint, they could all eat like kings. More days and nights went by with no signs of liberation. He continued to have similar, disturbing, blurry dreams. Lucas noticed that several of his cellmates never seemed to come out from under their blankets. Soon he realized, much to his horror, that they were dead. It did not take long for him to envision himself under one of those blankets, and it took all his willpower to keep from having another panic attack. One night, while Lucas was dreaming, there were screams from outside. The screams woke Lucas, along with everyone else, and the screams sounded almost exactly like the screams in his dreams. But the ones in his dreams seemed closer. They could only speculate as to the cause of the ruckus, for no one had any news of the outside world. They imagined it was probably somehow caused by the oppressive Black Eagle soldiers. The screams came sporadically throughout the night, and they were always dismissed as the Black Eagle's work. That is, until they got a new cellmate. The next day, Vernon Dubell was tossed into the cell with little struggle. He was a small boy, slightly younger than Lucas. Naturally, he gravitated toward Lucas, who was the only other child there. "Ouch! Looks like they dragged you behind a horse, they did." "Shh!" hissed Lucas. "They don't like it when we make noise." "Oh, sorry." "Who are you, anyway?" "I'm Vernon Dubell." "Dubell? Like the mayor?" "Yep, he's my pop." "That explains why you're here. They think he knows where the queen is hiding. They threw me in here until he talks, but truth is, he don't know. So I guess I'm stuck in here, at least till the ghoul comes and kills all the guards." "Did you just say ghoul?" "Yeah, ain't you heard all the commotion last night?" "We heard screaming." "That was the ghoul. Least, I think it's a ghoul." Everyone in the cell was staring oddly at Vernon. When he noticed, he grew quiet and embarrassed. Why'd they throw you in here?" "I'm Lucas Archer. My father was the great mage Archer." "Wow!" Vernon looked at Lucas with sudden awe. "Never mind about that. What about this ghoul?" "Well, if I never saw it with my own two eyes, I wouldn't suspect it was half bad at all, on account of it killing off a whole slew of them Black Eagle men. I got a good look at it last night, though. Now I know it killed them just because they was the only ones up and about. It'll kill anything and everything it comes across, I suspect. From a distance, it don't look like much. It looks like a small man or a boy. Up close is a different story, though. It ain't got no face. Least not nothing you could rightfully call a face, anyways. It moans 'cause it ain't got no mouth. It sorta passes through people, and when it does, they die. Swords, arrows, maces, any weapon just passes right through the damn thing. It can't be killed. I ran when I saw it. That's the only thing you can do. Run from it." I never heard of anything like that. Where'd it come from?" "No one knows. Least, no one I know knows." Later that afternoon, Lucas got a nice surprise. Something the size of an arm was slipped through the window bars and it thudded to the floor. It was wrapped in paper on which Lucas's full name was neatly written. Everyone knew what it was before Lucas even had a chance to open it. They could smell it. They had not smelled anything like it for a long time. Roast beef. It was a heavy roast beef sandwich with all the trimmings. It looked idyllic, as if made by a gourmet chef who put great care into its assembly. "Thanks, Blake," Lucas hissed toward the window. Blake and culinary arts were a good combination after all, Lucas thought. Lucas did not hesitate to pull the sandwich apart and pass it around the cell. The prisoners voraciously smacked and moaned as they ate. Their stomachs were stretched after a mere few bites, which was good, for there was barely enough for everyone. The constant thank yous throughout the rest of the day were actually starting to become slightly annoying. The next night was very frightening. Lucas had dreams that the Black Eagle soldiers were shooting flaming arrows at him. People, soldiers and Devonstonians alike, ran before him. The crowds clashed and there were riots all around him. Everything was a blur. Lucas awoke to much commotion and sounds of fighting in the streets, as if his dream came to life again. There was a faint crackling sound of a structure fire, and the world beyond the window dimly flickered and glowed orange. Lucas thought mainly about his friends and if they were okay. The other cellmates' thoughts dwelt on their families, but Lucas's only family left were his friends, and perhaps the Leatherhides. The world outside was not ending altogether, though, for day after day the sandwiches kept coming. The dead bodies were finally removed from the cell to make way for new prisoners, who were suddenly plentiful. They had news from the outside, horrific stories. "The Black Eagle is becoming much worse," said a new arrival, a pudgy nobleman named Curtis Thender, who looked like a different species than some of the gaunt, long-time residents of the prison. "They've been storming the streets ever since the killings. They've gone mad. They've abandoned the formality of taxes and have resorted to outright plundering. They take and butcher and burn like a bunch of crazed savages, all due to the hasty actions of a few selfish rebels." "No," Vernon Dubell interrupted. "It's a ghoul doing the killing." "Oh, I'm so bloody sick and tired of hearing ghost stories about this so-called ghoul," I can assure you, boy, that there's no such thing. I saw it. Rubbish. Curtis Thender took up a spot beneath the window, which made Lucas uneasy. He could not help but envision what a man like Thender would do if an enormous sandwich fell into his lap. Lucas could feel the hunger pains already. The next day, commotion outside not only lasted throughout the night, but well into the morning. That afternoon, indeed, the daily sandwich, delectable turkey, did fall into Thender's lap. He might have had a similar expression if he had just unearthed buried treasure. He began to tear off the wrappings. Vernon Dubell was the first to protest. "Hey, that's Lucas's sandwich!" Vernon still struggled with the new requirement of speaking softly, and several people shushed him. "Lucas? Who's Lucas?" Thender looked concerned. Might this Lucas bloke seize his newfound prize? "I am, sir. We've been sharing the sandwiches." Thender looked up and down at the tattered boy and seemed relieved. He flipped the sandwich over and saw the words, "Lucas Archer," neatly scrawled upon the paper wrapping. "It's from a friend of mine, sir," continued Lucas. "He attends a culinary arts class at Yellowleaf." "How long have you been in here, boy?" replied Thender. "There isn't culinary arts anymore, or any other such thing. The Black Eagle has put an end to school and the market and anything else that even slightly resembles culture or civilization. No, I'm afraid it's every man for himself from now on." Thender unwrapped the sandwich and proceeded to greedily wolf it down. "Hey!" yelled Vernon. Everyone winced at the volume of his shout. "Look here, boy," growled Thender. "If you can take it from me, you can have it." That ended the argument, for there was no way to contend with a man of Thender's girth. Everyone was disgusted with Thender, but they were preoccupied with his ominous news of the Black Eagle's more stringent oppressions. A few people were still worried that a guard was going to come and beat someone due to Vernon's outburst, but nobody came. The guards seemed much too busy lately for a trivial beating. The following day, another sandwich fell into Thender's lap. Immediately afterward, Vernon bolted toward the high window and shouted up at it, "Don't send any more! There's a fat slob stealing 'em!" Everyone shushed him in unison, except Thender, who was outraged. He stood with a strained grunt and backhanded little Vernon across the face, sending him crumpling to the floor. Lucas leapt onto Thender without thinking. The pains from Lucas's many beatings quickly surfaced and shrieked at him. He was in no condition for a fight, especially with a full-grown man 4 times his size. Thender tossed Lucas to the floor and kicked him just above his right eye at the brow. The clanking of a rushing guard resounded. Most people looked at the floor and tried to seem inconspicuous. The guard appeared at the bars and began to fiddle with his keys. "I swear I'm gonna kill someone!" shouted the guard. "No need, my good man," said Thender. "I've handled the matter." He gestured toward the fallen boys. The guard glanced down at Lucas clutching his face and rolling around in pain. Vernon was on the floor too, gasping because the wind was knocked out of him when he fell. "It was them two making the ruckus then, was it?" "Indeed," answered Thender. "I've already given them a good thrashing." The guard let out a long, thoughtful sigh. "All righty, I ain't got time for this anyway." In a flash and clatter, he was gone, and everyone was relieved. By the time the sandwich was in Thender's belly and he was sucking mayonnaise off his fingers, Lucas's eye had swollen shut again. "You're welcome," said Thender. Lucas dreamt that there were whole crowds of people running away from him, scared witless. They were blurry, as usual, but Lucas could somehow sense the fear in their eyes. Eventually, the streets were devoid of people, so he just wandered around, searching. He always felt the urgent need to find something, but he did not know what it was. He was aimless, yet desperate. The feeling was very frustrating. He awoke to sounds of fighting and shouting outside. That night, there was more commotion outside than usual. Sometimes, however, there was a lull in the sounds of chaos, and there was enough quiet to hear an eerie moaning. Vernon exclaimed that it was the sound of the ghoul. It sounded like it was in agony. Wherever it wandered, chaos ensued, for there was no one willing to brave the thing's presence. There were no more audacious soldiers looking to prove themselves. There were no more heroes. They had all fallen to the inexplicable creature. The old man who had helped Lucas during his first day in prison finally succumbed to his injuries. Lucas cried, which caused tremendous pain for his swollen eye. He was beginning to accept the inevitability of death. The intervals between the guards bearing bread and water were lengthening. They had brought nothing that day, and thirst had spread like a disease. Perhaps they thought that leaving them in the cell was the easiest way to eliminate them. No muss or fuss like outside. Just let them wither away. A quiet death. Fender was the only one who still looked healthy and energetic. Lucas imagined that if he only had some paint, he could use collovium to paint the bars away. Fender waited patiently for his daily sandwich, which usually arrived at the same time every day. He was worried, though, that Lucas's sandwich-bearing friend heard Vernon's outburst and the sandwiches would stop coming. His puffy face was alight, however, when that day's sandwich did fall into his lap from the window above. He violently tore off the paper and stuffed half the sandwich into his gaping maw. He hardly had enough room in his mouth to chew. In fact, a large chunk of bread stuck out of his mouth as he munched away. Fender's loud chewing and moaning suddenly stopped. His complexion turned a slight shade of green, and he gagged. With a geyser-like spray, the chewed food shot out of his mouth and rained upon several disgusted cellmates. He vomited whatever else was in his stomach and dropped the sandwich to the floor. It had been made with all manner of rotten meat and foul ingredients. Fender grunted and panted and looked outraged. Lucas gave Vernon a satisfied nudge with his elbow, and Vernon snickered lowly. The sandwich bearer heard his outburst after all. Lucas dreamt that he was outside the prison, staring at the building in the cold night with his blurry dream vision. He wondered if whatever or whoever he was looking for was inside that building. He needed to communicate with the soldiers, not butcher them, for he knew they could help him find what he was looking for. He could not talk, though. Maybe, however, he could write. It was difficult to remember how to spell. He could not concentrate. His mind was somehow sluggish, as if his intellect was blurred along with his vision. His frustration overwhelmed him, and he yelled. The night was unusually quiet until the moaning woke everyone up, including Lucas, who took a moment to realize he was no longer in that dreamy realm. The ominous moaning sounded close, which meant everyone else was probably far away. Sometime during midnight, the moaning sounded much louder, as if the ghoul was right outside the building. Several of the prisoners were visibly shaking. Lucas, however, was not. Different scenarios played out in his mind. So what if the ghoul did kill all the prison guards? At least the prisoners would be safe. How could the ghoul get past the bars? Then some friendly Devonstonian might come along and free them. Wait, could the ghoul get through the bars? Maybe, Lucas wondered. Suddenly, there was a loud collective clatter from within the prison walls. Several Black Eagle soldiers were marching from cell to cell, and they were shouting. Everyone was awake and looking very nervous. As the soldiers drew nearer, Lucas could hear what they were shouting. "Archer! Is Lucas Archer in this cell?" Lucas's heart pounded. He felt sick. When the soldiers arrived at their cell, everyone looked to the floor. Then the dreaded question came. "Is there a Lucas Archer in here?" No one answered. During the silence, Lucas began to feel relieved. Maybe nobody would say. Then he heard Thender's voice. "He's right over there." Lucas looked up to see Thender pointing at him. "You ugly, stinking pig!" yelled Vernon. Keys were instantly being jangled about. The door slid open and crashed to a halt. The soldiers flooded in and grabbed hold of Lucas's arm. They dragged him before he could rightfully walk, and his feet slid across the concrete floor. As they pulled him from the cell, one of the guards said something very disturbing. "Lucas Archer, the ghoul wants you." Chapter 27. A Familiar Face. Lucas may not have been afraid a moment ago, but now he was trembling. There would be no withering away by starvation and dehydration. No, Lucas's death would come harshly and painfully by the hands, or claws perhaps, of some enigmatic creature known only as the ghoul. Lucas lost track of how many days he was in that cell, but he did not imagine that when he finally got out he would want nothing more than to go back. He started to scramble backward in a panic, but the soldier's forcefulness brought him ever forward toward the main foyer. "Ease down, boy. You're going and that's that." "Why me?" "'Cause you is who the ghoul asked for." The soldier turned to one of his mates. "Maybe once the ghoul has this little twit, he'll leave us alone for a change." "You don't reckon this Archer kid is what it's been looking for all along?" "Maybe. It's worth a shot, ain't it?" The cool night air felt like death. Lucas was crying and hyperventilating. He looked around at Devonstone and saw the aftermath of carnage. There were dozens of dead Black Eagle soldiers strewn about in various stages of decomposition. Several buildings had burned unchecked and were blackened shells. There were weapons everywhere. Long swords and daggers littered the streets. Arrows stuck from every wall, as if they had been recently loosed in every direction. What sort of madness had been going on? "See there, boy? The ghoul wrote that on the wall over there." The soldier pointed to a brick wall that had large, sloppy writing on it. They brought Lucas close to the wall so he could read it. The strange writing upon the wall was written with some kind of goop. The writing stated plainly, "I want Lucas Archer." There was a smell about the writing that Lucas thought he recognized. Before he could place the odor, a soldier pulled him away. "I don't know what it wants with me," yelled Lucas. "How does it even know me?" "Was hoping you could tell us. I guess we'll find out soon enough. Hurry up. It'll show up any second, and we ought to be on the roof when it does." They pushed Lucas into the middle of the street. They had set up a circle of torches, and one of the soldiers was hastily lighting them. Lucas was in the middle of the circle, illuminated perfectly in the night. "Come on, let's go!" The soldiers scurried to the rooftops. One of them turned to Lucas before leaving, pulled an arrow from his quiver, and pointed it at Lucas. "If you even think about leaving this circle, a dozen of us are going to turn you into a pincushion. Might as well make the ghoul happy and let him have his way with you so he'll leave the rest of us alone. Who knows, maybe he won't kill you, but we surely would. So take the gamble and don't leave this circle." After his threat, the soldier disappeared into the darkness, and Lucas was alone. The torch flames trembled in the breeze as the wind funneled through the streets, howling. The flames sounded like flapping flags in the quiet dead of night. The ring of light was barely enough to see 30 or 40 feet into the darkness. There was a dead soldier in the torch ring, and Lucas knelt by his side. The man was covered in goop, the same goop that was used to write on the wall. It had that familiar smell, too. Lucas put his nose as close as he could bear and inhaled deeply. It was unmistakable. He touched the goop and rubbed it between his fingers. He had an epiphany that thunderstruck him. Could it be? Just then, there was a horrific moan, and Lucas straightened up. The simple act of standing was still painful. He had one good eye and one swollen, squinting eye to see what was coming. A slow, limping figure emerged from the darkness. It moaned again, as if it were in utter agony. Whatever it was not natural. The ghoul limped within clear view. An arrow whooshed by and passed easily through the creature, as if it were made of something insubstantial. The arrow clacked onto the cobblestone, coated with the same familiar-smelling goop. "Hold on to your damn arrows!" yelled a Black Eagle captain. The ghoul completely ignored the arrow and instead seemed transfixed with Lucas. When Lucas saw the ghoul at last, in full light, he knew what it was right away. He recognized it and somehow felt less afraid. "Ha!" Lucas's voice echoed. He reduced his tone to a whisper. "You're me, aren't you? Of course. I stared at you for hours. You're my unfinished self-portrait." Lucas clutched his brush wand collovium and understood. The unfinished, painted Lucas knelt and began to scrawl a message on the ground with its bare finger, leaving behind a smearing of oil paint, the familiar goop. When it was finished, the message said, "I hurt. Finish me, Lucas." The strange figure then looked up at him, and Lucas suddenly felt pity. Though his self-portrait was only from the waist up, it had a full body, as would be implied. Its full body, however, took on the same unfinished look of his bust. Its features were mere shadows. It was a whisper of a real person. "If you crawl back into the painting and I finish rendering you, will you look and act like a regular person?" Painted Lucas nodded. "What are you saying to it, boy?" shouted a soldier. "How come it ain't killed you yet?" "Listen," whispered Lucas to his painted self. "Let's make a deal. If you either kill or drive out every man wearing the crest of the Black Eagle, I'll happily finish painting you, okay?" The creature growled and sounded very disappointed. Lucas remained steadfast. "That is my condition." Lucas lowered his voice. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I told the soldiers that all they need is a jar of turpentine to dispose of you." The painted Lucas wrote "Deal" on the ground. "Excellent!" Lucas was almost giddy. "Start with the guards in that prison. Remember, don't hurt anyone except those who wear the Black Eagle crest." Painted Lucas obediently scurried away toward the prison. Lucas snickered and sat down with his legs crossed. After all, he was not allowed to leave the circle of torches. "Boy!" yelled a soldier from a rooftop, unseen. "Where's it going?" his voice echoed. "I don't know," Lucas lied. 5 minutes went by before he heard the first scream. Then there was another, and another. Sporadic clatter and commotion erupted here and there. Lucas sat and listened to the morbid work of his summoned ghoul for a long time. Most soldiers realized the ghoul's new, more calculated, malicious intent and abandoned Devonstone of their own accord. After a while, Lucas shouted, "Can I leave?" There was no answer, so Lucas did leave, quickly. Lucas scurried into the prison, where there were several dead guards. Oil paint leaked from their mouths and noses, for they had painted Lucas when he passed through them. They had drowned in oil paint. Lucas shuddered as he knelt to retrieve a key ring from one of their belts. He opened the first cell he came to and yelled, "You're free! Hurry home!" Prisoners flooded slowly out, limping and moaning like a crowd of ghouls themselves. Lucas ran from cell to cell, freeing everyone. He was shocked to see Fuga and Gretchen Leatherhide coming out of a cell. "Lucas, honey, how'd you manage this?" said Gretchen, bewildered. "I'll explain later. Why are you in here? Didn't you know? Blakey stopped some of them soldiers from chasing you out of the school. He got away and we ain't seen him since. We ain't seen him or Timmy. When the Black Eagle found out we was his parents, they threw us in here." "I'm sorry." "Hush," said Mr. Leatherhide. "Ain't nothing to be sorry about." "Come on home with us," said Gretchen. "Okay, but first I have to finish here." The Leatherhides, who looked a little thinner, divided the keys and helped Lucas unlock all the cells. Throngs of prisoners funneled through the front doors and into the open night, free. Before Lucas reached the final cell, his old cell, he scooped up a fallen sword from one of the guards. Lucas's old cellmates awaited him at the bars, ready to go. Curtis Fender was nearest the door. Lucas raked the sword across the bars, which made a shrill noise and sent sparks flying. "You get to the back of the cell!" Lucas yelled at Fender. The portly man hesitated. Fuga Leatherhide approached Lucas. "What's going on here, Lucas? Put that sword down!" Mr. Leatherhide stripped Lucas of his sword and it clanged to the ground. "Why are you threatening that man?" "Oh, thank you kindly, my good man," said Fender. "Mr. Leatherhide, he knocked that boy to the ground." Lucas pointed at Vernon, who looked as excited as a little wide-eyed field mouse. "And look what he done to Lucas's eye!" shouted Vernon. Fuga took the keys from Lucas and they rattled as he unlocked the door. "Okay, everyone out." Fender was the first to leave, but Fuga grabbed a fistful of his shirt along with some of his chest hair. "Except you," he growled. Fender tried to knock his arm away, but Fuga followed through with a swift punch to his face and was careful to aim for his right eye. Fuga tossed Fender back into the cell when everyone else was out. He slammed the bars home. "I reckon you belong in there." "I'll let you out after you've lost a little sandwich weight," added Lucas. Fender's face turned deep red and he pounded the nearest wall. "Unbelievable! Do you know who I am?" His ranting trailed off as Lucas headed out of the building. Lucas did not realize it at first, but little Vernon Dubell was by his side and he had a wide, gleaming smile. The soldiers were nearly in full retreat, their forces scattered and leaderless. The army of the Black Eagle, however, had many legions. Those soldiers who left Kree were branded as deserters by the main bulk of the army. Stories of a ghoul were received as lunacy. Instead, it was speculated that a strong rebellion must have arisen in Kree. Renauld, Lord of the Fire Realm, the Obsidian commander of the Black Eagle forces throughout the woodlands, decided to send a more capable legion to Kree, the 5th Legion, and they would not be as kind. Kuroth was their leader. Those who had great influence in the world knew to watch the comings and goings of Kuroth with great interest, for wherever he settled, mass devastation followed. Chapter 28. Reunion. Lucas's first order of business was to head to Blake's house and eat. The Leatherhides were happy to have Lucas back, but there was little more than scraps, for nobody had been in that house for a while. Fuga and Gretchen were busy getting cleaned up and preparing to head out again to search for Blake. Though Lucas felt exhausted, he wanted to help search too. The first place they decided to go was the Iridimaculum's house. As they knocked, Gigi rushed to the door. When he saw Lucas, any notion of formality was gone, and he gave him a tight hug. "Please do come in," said Gigi's mother, Claudia, an elegant woman who spent much of her youth in the high society of Atrium City. Gigi hounded Lucas about every minute detail of his escapades since running from the school. Lucas spoke quickly, for the Leatherhides were understandably impatient about their endeavor, and it was clear that Blake was not at Gigi's house. "All right, hate to be rude, but we need to get going," said Fuga. "Whatever is the rush?" responded Tuvoy, Gigi's father. "Ain't you heard?" said Fuga. "Blake's gone missing. Him and Timmy." "Oh, no, Mr. Leatherhide, I know exactly where they are," said Gigi. "What? Where? Is my Blakey okay?" Gretchen smothered poor Gigi. "Yes, they're just fine. Lucas, they're camping out in Merryweather's thicket." The Iridimaculums would not allow Gigi to go with Lucas and the Leatherhides to Merryweather's thicket, not with the recent chaos, even despite Lucas's assurances that the Black Eagle were abandoning Devonstone. Gigi was furious with his parents and retreated behind the slammed door of his bedroom. It was daybreak when Lucas led the Leatherhides into the grassy hills south of Devonstone. Morning fog sank heavily before them, and the hills were like islands in a silvery gray ocean of mist. They stayed close together, for it was easy to become shrouded and lost. The scattered trees were like blurry dark giants staring down at them. The mist beaded up on their skin, which made them cooler. Time seemed to slow, and Lucas grew worried that they were lost. There was a dark wall in the distance. As they approached, clarity came with them, and it was clear that the dark wall was the tree line of Merryweather's thicket. No sooner did they realize what they were looking at than a shout full of malice pierced the thick morning air. "Identify yourself! My arrow's aimed right at your head!" They stopped, not knowing full well whose head was currently in danger. Lucas recognized the voice after a moment's thought, despite the voice being lowered for sake of a more menacing-sounding threat. "Justin, it's Lucas! And Blake's mom and dad are with me!" There was silence. Lucas and the Leatherhides remained still. Suddenly, there was an outburst of laughter from directly behind them. They all jumped and spun around to see Justin standing behind them, bow in hand. "Justin, how'd you get there? I thought you were in front of us." I know. It's the echo. I'm glad you're on my side." Lucas slapped Justin on the back. "It's good to see you." "Good to see me? Man, I'm glad to see you're alive. Judging by the looks of you, though, I'd say you're just barely alive. What'd they do, drop you off a cliff?" "Just him," Gretchen interjected. "Where's my Blakey?" "Oh, right. Follow me, then." They stayed close behind Justin as they headed for the woodline. Justin looked filthy. His face was smeared with muck, and his clothes were ragged. He looked like someone who had made the woods his home over the recent weeks. Now that he was not downwind anymore, that was even more obvious. "Oh, Blakey Pooh!" shouted Justin. "You out of your damn mind?" Blake's voice resounded. "What's all that bloody shouting for? And don't call me Blakey. Only me mom calls me that, and that's 'cause she thinks I'm a damn baby." Blake began to appear through the fog as he ranted on. "I swear, if I were 8 feet tall, she'd still treat me like her itsy-bitsy baby." Blake came to a sudden halt, simultaneously fearing horror and happiness. He was face to face with his mother. She looked as though she might hit him, but that was how she looked at him 50% of the time, so Blake was not too concerned about that. "Mom! Dad! You're out!" Blake dashed for his mother and bear-hugged her, nearly picking her up. "How'd you get out?" "Well, honey, you have Lucas to thank for that." Blake slowly released his mother and glowered at Lucas. "Well, you wouldn't have been there at all if it weren't for this bloody fool." In 2 strides, Blake was all Lucas could see. He pushed Lucas hard, and it was a wonder Lucas managed to stay on his feet. Blake immediately regretted what he had done, for Lucas yelped in pain from his many wounds. Only then did he realize how bad Lucas was hurt and how desperate his situation must have been. Fuga rushed between the two boys. "There'll be none of that, boy." "Sorry." Blake looked at the ground. "I didn't know he was so busted up." "It's the Black Eagle you ought to be mad at, not your mate over there." Fuga nodded toward Lucas. "We'd still be in that prison if it weren't for him." "Well, it was his fault you was in there in the first place. If he didn't get into so much damn trouble—" "Blakey, enough already!" Gretchen cut him off. Suddenly, Darlene Millie came out of the fog. "Blake, honey, what's going on?" "Blake, honey?" Mrs. Leatherhide looked furious. Darlene quickly realized what she had just walked into. "She hasn't been staying with you, has she?" "Ma, they found out she was my girlfriend. If I didn't take her, she would have ended up in jail too. She was gonna stay over at Merriweather's, but—" "Merriweather, huh?" "Traitor," interrupted Lucas. "Oh, shut your hole," Blake shot back. "But what?" insisted Gretchen. "But her house has been ransacked or something. We ain't seen her since." Lucas sighed and smiled. "Small favors," he said. Darlene squinted hatefully at him. They followed behind Blake, Darlene, and Justin as they walked deeper into the thicket. They had made a small clearing in what looked to be a cozy little campsite. There was a tent and a fire pit. Freshly washed clothes hung on a line between two trees. Unlike Justin, Blake was hygienic, thanks to Darlene. Blake was beginning to welcome them to what he thought was going to be their new home for a while. He never imagined that they would be going back to Devonstone. Lucas, however, regaled his story of the last few weeks, and they looked hopeful. "How do we know all the soldiers are gone?" asked Justin. "That ghoul of yours surely couldn't drive 'em all out." "It already did kill half of them before I told it to get rid of the other half," Lucas responded. "Just to be safe, maybe we should stay here for a little while." So they did. Thanks to Justin, they already had plenty to eat. The venison was the first real food Lucas had since his last sandwich. Finally eating made Lucas remember that sandwich. "Blake, have you been out here all this time?" "Yup." Blake still looked as though he did not want to speak to Lucas. "Then how did you get those sandwiches to me?" "Sandwiches? What sandwiches?" Lucas tried to think of any clues, but could not determine who else it might have been. Gigi? No. He could make a potion with 53 different ingredients, but not a sandwich. He probably would not have even thought of that. Lucas wondered if he would ever know who made those sandwiches. Lucas and Mr. Leatherhide fell asleep by the fire, and Gretchen did not have the heart to wake them, so she took Darlene by the hand and they adjourned to the tent. Gretchen stayed close to Darlene's side so that if she tried to get up in the night, she would know. Blake and Justin loitered around the campfire for a while before their heads started bobbing. Soon, the crickets were loud, and so were the snores. Lucas's disturbing dreams returned. Everything was still very blurry, as if he were looking through water. There were many Black Eagle soldiers running from him. Nothing they did to fight back was effective. He felt invincible. He saw men running. He saw them dying. Then, after countless Black Eagle soldiers either ran or perished before his eyes, he found himself wandering the hills in the dark of night. He was approaching Merriweather's thicket. At least that was where he thought he was, for everything was so blurry. Lucas awoke to a familiar moan. The campfire was a dimly glowing ember in the darkness, but he could still see painted Lucas standing over him. Chapter 29. Seeing Double. Painted Lucas did not look happy. The faceless front of his head was a jumble of contorted shadows. If Lucas had to continue the painting at that moment, he would have no choice but to paint an angry expression on that face. Hi there," said Lucas, which woke Justin. "Wow, Lucas, that's your painting?" "Yeah, but calm down. I don't think he likes a lot of moving about." Lucas turned back to his painted self. "How did you know I was here?" Painted Lucas tapped where his temple would be and then pointed at Lucas. "Do you know everything I know?" Painted Lucas nodded. Lucas had a sudden realization that made him gasp. He knew everything his painted self knew as well. Those were not dreams in the night. They were reality. He and his painted self had a precarious connection of sorts, but it was a blurry connection that was subtle and difficult to comprehend. "Did you do what I asked?" asked Lucas, already knowing the answer. Painted Lucas nodded. "And I suppose you want me to finish you now?" He nodded more vigorously and moaned again, which woke up almost everyone else. Blake looked up, shouted, rolled while scooping up a fallen branch, and shot to his feet, wielding the branch like a club. Mr. Leatherhide remained asleep. Darlene's head poked out of the tent flap, screamed, and then retracted back into the tent. Gretchen came thundering out. Painted Lucas, hunched and arms spread wide, threateningly approached her, growling. The leaves stuck to his painted feet like shoes, covering them as he crunched forward. Gretchen recoiled. "Stop!" commanded Lucas. "I said don't harm anyone else, or I won't finish you." Painted Lucas obediently halted, and his shoulders slouched like that of a scolded child. "I can't go on like this," Lucas said to the others. "I can't keep trying to control this thing. These visions, I can't stand it anymore. I'm gonna finish him, like I promised. Right now." Painted Lucas followed the real Lucas back to Yellowleaf High School and back to the canvas from whence he came. The school had been abandoned ever since Lucas's painted self emerged and ran amok, which was not long after Lucas was apprehended and thrown in jail. Lucas remembered his dream in which he was in a classroom and the students were screaming at him. That was real, and it made him shudder. The school looked like a place frozen in time, like everyone had suddenly disappeared and left behind all their possessions. The two Lucases, Luci, headed for the art studio. Lucas picked up his fallen easel and the blank canvas from which Painted Lucas was born. He retrieved some supplies, paint, thinner, and a palette. "Okay," said Lucas. "In you go." Painted Lucas hoisted himself up and into the painting as if he were climbing through an open window. Once inside, he was inanimate again, and in the exact same position Lucas remembered painting him. He even noticed that there were still little dried blood splatters from the Zeke explosion that had sliced Lucas's ear. Lucas scraped and mixed various colors on his palette with his knife. He angled the palette toward the bright morning sun, which was beaming through the windows. He added some oil. The paint was too thick. He added some thinner. Lucas stopped and became thoughtful as he held a jar of turpentine. He thought about doing it. With a simple splash, Painted Lucas could be gone forever. Lucas tightly clutched the jar. He pivoted, ready to thrust the jar's contents onto the canvas and send the colors running. No, he could not bring himself to do it. He had made a promise. Every indication told him that what was on that canvas was alive, and he did not want to kill it. More importantly, there was some elusive intuition which told him that he needed to finish the painting. Lucas pulled collovium from his waistband and loaded it with paint. He began to hone the details of his self-portrait. The bristles of collovium took the form of whatever shape he needed as he needed it. As the rendering became more refined, Lucas could feel the brushstrokes on his own skin. He truly was recreating himself, and he could feel everything the painting felt. He painted over the blood splatters left by Zeke. He did not want anyone to mistake them for pimples. As Lucas painted the eyes, he began to literally see himself from the painting's perspective. It was a distracting, blurry double image. As the eyes were refined, however, Lucas's vision became sharp. He could see what he was painting, and he could see himself painting. It was an incomparable feeling. The eyes were complete, and the blurriness in Lucas's own vision was gone. He did not even realize it was there until it was gone. His vision was sharp once again. From that point onward, he no longer needed a mirror and was able to use the image of his real face as a reference to finish his painted face. When he painted the rest of his face, he left out the bruises and cuts, and as he did, his own wounds seemed less painful, almost non-existent. Throughout the day, various people visited him and brought him food and drink. Gigi was the first there, and he stayed a long while. Then Justin, Fuga, and Gretchen came. Blake would not come because Darlene would not come, especially not after Lucas's insensitive comment about Merriweather's potentially ill fate. When there was not enough daylight to paint by anymore, Lucas placed the painting in the storeroom, which was windowless and pitch black. That night, Lucas's sleep was peaceful and completely free of dreams, for painted Lucas remained on the canvas and in the darkness. The next day, Lucas finished the painting. This time, everyone was there. All the Leatherhides, the Iridomaculums, Justin, even Darlene Millie, and a crowd of people Lucas had never seen before showed up. They had heard rumors about the ghoul's true origins and about how it had driven out the Black Eagle for them. They were anxious to see if the rumors were true. Some did not believe anything about the story, but they were there nonetheless, simply because they thought a good laugh would be had by all. Lucas turned the easel around so that everyone could get a good view of the painting. The usual oohs and ahs erupted, which Lucas was used to when it came to showing his art. The painting was literally lifelike. It looked more real than any painting most of them had ever seen. The only other paintings that could rival its realism were other Lucas Archer paintings. The portrait stared blankly back at its audience, but did not move. Someone snickered, which was infectious. Soon there was outright laughter. "Ha! Guess the joke's on us," someone said. "I almost fell for it." Those close to Lucas and those who had personally witnessed his work come to life were not laughing. When the others' laughter abated, they began to chat amongst themselves and disperse. "It blinked!" someone shouted. That halted everyone. The portrait blinked again, and the room was loud with gasps of awe. "I don't believe it!" Painted Lucas stuck his head out and looked around the room. He hoisted himself up and hurtled out of the canvas. Several people fainted. They remained unattended to, for Painted Lucas had everyone's full attention. "Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Archer," said Painted Lucas. "Are you really?" asked Gigi. "Aren't you a replication? Not really Lucas Archer. A copy of him, so to speak?" "No," replied Painted Lucas. "I am him. We are in two places at once." "That's very strange indeed," said Gigi. "A test, then. Tell me something that only Lucas and I would know. Tell me where you first saw me." You were standing under an awning in front of the bookstore on Main Street the day before the end of Summer Festival. You were perusing through the stacks on the bargain table, if I remember correctly." Gigi's mouth dropped open. "It really is you." "Yes," said the original Lucas. "We are the same person." "How is it that you was able to drive out all them Black Eagle?" someone asked. "Not that I'm complaining or nothing." "They couldn't hurt me because I wasn't yet fully realized," said Painted Lucas. "I was there, yet I wasn't. I was solid, yet fluid. Everything about me felt incomplete. My senses were dulled and sluggish. My thoughts were unclear and difficult to comprehend. Sometimes I thought I was in a prison cell and had to fight my way out. Sometimes I knew what I was and that I had to find my maker so that he could complete me. Sometimes I didn't even know what I was doing. Make no mistake, though, now that I am fully rendered, I am a real person." "Excuse us for feeling uncomfortable," said Gretchen. "That'll change with time. I just want to say thank you for helping us. We owe you a debt of gratitude, Lucas. And, you too, Lucas." "Hear, hear, the Black Eagle is gone," yelled Justin. To that, everyone burst into high cheer and applause. Both Lucases turned red. Kuroth and the 5th Legion marched through the oppressed streets of Atrium City as they headed for the outskirts. The many residents of that once shining city were very glad to see him go. Kuroth would lead them to what was known in Kree as the Western Woodlands. In Atrium City it was called the Great Expanse. Either way, it was a substantial forest wilderness that separated hilly Kree country from urban Atrium City. It was the only obstacle that delayed Kuroth's onslaught. Garrett Narmonius, heir to the Woodland throne, was already deep into the forest, well on his way to Kree, far ahead of Kuroth and his legion. He was exiled and vigorously hunted. His mother and sister were still hiding somewhere in Kree. He wanted badly to see them again, and he knew they would be overjoyed to see him. His arrival would be sad, however, for it was due to grim circumstances. It seemed fate had reduced his position by chance from king to mere messenger. He brought the bleak news of Kuroth's coming because he felt he was the only one who could do it properly. Through covert observation and cunning intuition, he had gleaned knowledge of every nuance of the grand campaign aligning against Kree. He was a selfless man whose work was difficult and unseen. Thus he rarely reaped the glory of his great deeds. That did not matter to him, however, for the important tasks he set for himself were what constantly occupied his mind. It seemed to the fate of Kree rested on his shoulders. Deep within the dark caverns of Obsidia, it was feared that the loss of control in Kree would mean that the Tyrant King could be born unchecked. They had to retake Kree by any means at their disposal. Unbeknownst to Garrett or anyone else, Renaud, the Obsidian Lord, was prepared to send as many legions as would be required to bend Kree to his will. The Tyrant King was to be born in the Woodlands, and Renaud was determined to take him in his infancy, for that was the world's only chance of survival. Any children born there now, free of Black Eagle occupation, would surely be hidden. Kuroth had free rein, therefore, to bury Devonstone. There would be no more abductions, no more occupation, and no mercy. Now, their sole business was extermination. Chapter 30. Royalty. There was an end of summer festival that year. It was the most grandiose party of recent memory. It seemed everyone in Kree knew Lucas's name. Though he was only 15, he was held in a place of high honor in the hearts of Devonstonians. Both Lucas and his other self agreed to go their separate ways. The original stayed where he was, while the other took up residence in an abandoned house on the other side of town. Each knew what the other was doing, but they rarely dwelt in the same place. It was too confusing and too difficult to remain together. When they were apart, they had much more clarity of their own perspective. They did occasionally see each other, though, and acted as good friends. Lucas was effectively living two lives at the same time. They both meandered through different parts of the festival. Everyone was extraordinarily jubilant that the Black Eagle was gone at last. Many people who had been exiled or were in hiding came out and were reunited with their friends and family. Seeing all the happiness of returning fugitives made Lucas miss his godparents, and he was depressed about that for a while. There was tremendous fervor about the Queen and her daughter, who were supposed to come out of hiding at last and give a speech. A podium was set up on a stage that had been decorated with countless flowers. Many people would not wander far from the stage for fear of losing their good spot. Blake's anger with Lucas had abated, and he even felt slightly starstruck in Lucas's presence, for he was on such a high pedestal in everyone's eyes. They called Lucas the hero of Devonstone. His other self was treated no differently, for he looked and acted normally, just as personable and charismatic, a far cry from the mindless creature that had once plagued Devonstone's streets. There was no fear of him, for so few had ever actually seen his more alien, half-finished form. There was little, if any, distinction between the two Lucases. Two regal horns pierced the air with a high-pitched fanfare, and everyone who had dispersed hurried back to the stage. It was the Royal Woodland Anthem. The Queen herself was among them, and the anticipation was palpable. Though they were outdoors, there was a curtain and a backstage of sorts, where the Queen was, no doubt, getting ready. The sun was setting, and the usual colored lights had been strung about, giving off a dim yet magical glow. There was a clumsy fuss from behind the curtain. An anticlimactic exhale collectively hissed from the audience when they saw it was Maurice Dubel, the mayor, and not the Queen. Even little Vernon was disappointed to see that it was only his father. I know, said the mayor. You're all here to see the Queen. She is not some spectacle to be gawked at, I assure you. She is a true testament to our survival. She stands before us as the ruffians flee into the forest. His voice suddenly elevated to high volume. Please welcome your Queen of the Woodland Realm, Queen Narmonius, and her elegant daughter, Princess Vianette. The applause was so loud that it hurt Lucas's ears, for he doubly heard it. When he saw the Queen emerge from behind the curtain, her entrance was much more graceful than Dubel's. He thought that perhaps such an experience was something far more significant than he originally realized. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and he did not know that until he actually saw Her Highness. Her gown was long, lavender, and flourishing. Her neck was long as well and exposed, for her hair was done up in high piling swirls of thick, dark red. Her chin was high, and her walk seemed ballet-like. Then her daughter emerged. Only Princess Vianette, and Princess Vianette alone, could make Lucas forget he ever saw the Queen's high elegance, for Vianette was a vision of aching beauty. Lucas imagined that if he painted her portrait, he'd paint no more, for all other subjects would seem dull and muted after her. Vianette stood by her mother's side as Lucas gazed at her, Thanks to the other Lucas, he had 2 simultaneous vantage points to take in the vision of her loveliness. She might have been a few years older than Lucas. He couldn't tell. She was regal, idyllically regal, with a long, slender body and reddish-brown, slightly curly hair that trailed down to the small of her back. A slight constellation of freckles pleasantly sprinkled across her face. No, could it be? Lucas wondered. Was that the girl who tried to save him when the men of the Black Eagle had chased him down the street? Was it she who beckoned him into her house from the threshold? Was it she who risked her life to help him? Her beauty distracted him then just as it did now. Indeed, it was her. Lucas was highly conflicted. He was glad to see her again, but greatly intimidated by her high station in life. After all, she probably would not want anything to do with him, a mere commoner. Though technically Lucas was royalty, he certainly did not feel like it. Lucas felt that he must let go of his infatuation with her. He should expect to find a nice, typical woodland girl. Who were they? They were girls like Darlene Millie, Wendy Windmill, and, Lucas shuddered at the thought, Merriweather. The thought of ending up with someone like Merriweather changed Lucas's whole perspective. If he at least tried to speak with the lovely Vianette and she shunned him, then that would hardly be any different than if he did not try at all, Lucas thought. He had to try. But what reason would he ever have for being near Her Majesty again? "First," said the Queen, "I must say that I am extraordinarily grateful to be here tonight. Neither I nor my daughter would be alive right now if it weren't for the selfless aid the people of Cree have given us. I thank you." The Queen stopped while spontaneous applause erupted and eventually escalated to thunderous levels. A definite, "You're welcome." "Next," continued the Queen, "there is someone here who must be honored. He helped liberate us all, and he deserves our many thanks. I am speaking, of course, of Lucas Archer." There was more thunderous applause, even louder than before, with whistling added, for he wasn't a queen and the whistling was more acceptable. "Wait," Lucas said as he turned to Gigi. "Did she just say my name? She didn't say Lucas Archer." "Oh, yes, she did," Gigi responded, beaming. "Well," said the Queen, "what are you waiting for? Come up here, Mr. Archer." Lucas did not need to snake his way through the crowd, for they opened up a path for him. As he reached the stairs, at the base of the stage, Maurice Dubel clasped his shoulder and whispered into his ear, which actually was not a whisper at all, but for the loudness of the applause he needed to speak up. "Don't forget to bow," he said, "and thanks for helping my boy." He pushed Lucas forward, and Lucas flashed him a nervous smile. Lucas stood before Her Highness and bowed low. Too low, but he was understandably naive about such things. He was closer to Princess Vianette than ever before, and her radiance was almost tangible. Lucas was very dismayed, however, that she was squinting scornfully at him. Had he done something to offend Her Highness? He worried. The Queen again addressed the audience. "I'm sure many of you have speculated, and indeed you are correct, in assuming that Lucas's namesake is from the great mage Archer. He was Lucas's father, and I knew him well, for he was the king's closest advisor and confidant. He was a wondrous icon for the woodland people, and it seems Lucas is following in his footsteps. I am glad for that. I would also like to take this opportunity to honor the dearly departed Baron and Baroness of Willowwood, Frederick and Valerie Day, Lucas's godparents. They died because the Black Eagle wishes to end the royal line so that they may easily take our land." That was a bold lie. Many people knew the Black Eagle wanted to end the royal line not for land, but to prevent the tyrant king's birth. The queen, however, did not want dissension among her own people. After all, what if they too believed the tyrant king was coming? They might be more willing to let the royals die so that they may not have to worry about his dreaded highness. Many other great heroes died as well. The queen read off a long list of the honored dead and their great deeds as Lucas stood by her side and was not quite sure what to do with his hands. After a long speech about the honor and glory of death in the face of tyranny, she turned her attention to Lucas again. "Kneel, young archer." To this command, Lucas was slightly taken aback, but he did not want to seem insubordinate, so he quickly took a knee before the queen, not knowing what to expect. Mayor Dubel clambered onto the stage once again and bowed his head as he handed the queen a sheathed sword with outstretched arms. The blade sang as she pulled it from the scabbard. Its silvery sheen was blinding. For a moment, Lucas thought she was going to behead him. She touched the broadside of the blade to his right shoulder, and then his left. "I knight thee, Sir Archer of the Woodland Realm." High applause resounded and pierced the coming darkness deep into the surrounding wilds. Many people looked at the other Lucas and wondered if he was jealous. He, too, was Lucas, and that was difficult to comprehend. Though he was among the audience, he also felt like he was on stage. He felt the same pride, honor, joy, humility, and sheer nervousness as the Lucas on stage felt. The Lucas on stage also felt like he was in the audience. There was no jealousy, for they were both him. "Is there anything you wish to say to your people, Sir Lucas?" The queen presented the podium to Lucas, sheathed the sword, and handed it to him. Lucas stood at the podium for a long time and was silent. As the silence was beginning to feel awkward, he finally did speak. "I'm just a kid, and I don't have much to say. I know one thing I must do. There are other heroes among you who haven't died, but they almost did at one point or another. They are unsung heroes, and we all owe them a debt of gratitude. Please come up here and be recognized. Geradicus Aridomaculum." Gigi never heard Lucas say his proper name before, and it made him want to cry. "Blake Leatherhide." Blake laughed loudly and shook his head. "And Timothy Rogue." Justum's reaction was ambiguous. Lucas invented Justum's last name almost the same second he said it. Justum did not mind. He liked it, actually. He never had a last name. Where did last names come from, anyway? They had to start somewhere. Perhaps one day, far in the future, there will be a rogue family that came from a long line of rogue ancestors. That family name, probably unbeknownst to its bearers, will have been given to them by a teenager with a penchant for getting into monumental trouble. The four boys stood on the stage in a row as the audience applauded them. "Tell us of your deeds, unsung heroes," said the queen. Gigi had a jittery start when he began to speak of their escape from the oafish soldier and the bone horde. Justin was happy to talk about his amazing arrow through the armpit shot. Blake was content to brag about his recent status as a fugitive because of his fight with several soldiers in the hall at Yellowleaf. Mayor Dubel approached the queen, and eventually so did other nobles, and they quietly discussed matters of state while Gigi, Justin, and Blake went on and on about their adventures. The atmosphere was becoming quite relaxed and informal. That was when Lucas felt a rigid tap on his shoulder that was almost painful. Lucas was shocked to see that it was Her Highness, Vianette. His mouth opened, but to his surprise, no words came out. He managed a wince-inducing, squeaky, "Hi!" She jerked her head, beckoning him to follow her backstage. She disappeared behind the curtain, and Lucas reluctantly followed. He took a last glance at everyone and saw that they were all deep into their respective conversations. The stage had ceased to be a place of speeches and had instead turned into the center of a large party of sorts. No one noticed him or the princess leaving. Lucas worked his way through the curtain and emerged backstage, where there was a maze of makeshift dressing rooms made of wooden planks. He approached Vianette slowly, amazed that he was before her. She smacked him across the face, hard. "Next time I tell you to do something, do it!" she spat at him. Lucas almost fell backwards, not with the force of her blow, but with utter shock from her behavior. "I'm sorry, my lady. Did I do something wrong?" "My lady?" She let out a mocking laugh. "When you were in the street and I told you to hide in my house, you decided it would be infinitely wiser to dive into a bush. Of all the morons!" "That's Sir Moron." Lucas's chuckle was brief, for Vianette was not laughing. "That's it. Make jokes." "Highness, they not only would have captured me, but they would have captured you as well, a much higher prize than lowly Lucas Archer. Do you even know why I jumped out of that bush and tried to run away?" "Why?" "Because I heard one of them give the order to search your house. They had seen you and were suspicious." "I know," she said. "They came back and wrecked my house. Fortunately, I wasn't home at the time." "So, am I forgiven for disobeying, my lady?" "Only if you stop calling me my lady." Lucas saw her smile for the first time, and his heart quickened. It was a rare phenomenon, however, for her smile was gone as quickly and unexpectedly as it came. She looked away as she spoke again. "Did you get my sandwiches?" "In jail? You sent those?" "Indeed." I thought it was my friend Blake." "That ogre-like boy? You mistook my sandwiches for the ogre-like boy's?" "You don't understand. He's taking culinary arts, and the sandwiches were so... Not everyone, especially a prisoner, has their food prepared by a princess." Of course. Why did you do it then?" "Let's be honest. I knew you didn't deserve the treatment they gave you. I knew you diverted them away from me." "Then what's the real reason you smacked me?" Vianette clenched her teeth and scowled at him. She ostentatiously spun around and quickly walked away. "Wait, I'm sorry if I did anything wrong. I didn't mean to offend you." Lucas wanted to run after her, but did not. She was too grand for that. Apparently, she was too grand for him. Lucas sighed. He was wrong. Vianette shunning him was far worse than not speaking to her at all.